Hello, everyone. Happy to see so large audience in this webinar after the lunch break. And let me start the topic about the burndown charts and the eazyBI by mentioning a bit about the agile approaches. Those have established several new concepts in the daily practices regarding the project management, and it still keeps bringing even more with the safe and other extensions of the agile. And one such thing which comes from the agile world and it's here to stay is the burndown chart. And we feel from the users of eazyBI that it has been strongly used and seems becoming even more popular. And that is why we decided to cover this topic in the presentation to share the things we and our customers are doing about the burndown charts in eazyBI. So yeah, as David said, my name is Jānis. I'm working for eazyBI support team a bit more than 3 years. I like to work with the customer requests where I can use some of my engineering background, well, not electrical, software engineering background. I am pretty sure that reporting is a specific discipline of engineering by its complexity. And another thing is that it also covers a wide area of business concepts, and my previous experience in the project management, quality management areas helps somehow to cover those tricky customer requests, and burndown charts are definitely one type of such requests which we receive from customers. But even the most complex things usually start simple. I will illustrate how the things can be simple when building some simple burndown charts, and then we will touch some of the concepts behind the burndown charts and then dive a bit deeper to better understand what is under the hood when you need to implement your burndown chart in eazyBI. Almost all the things I will explain are available in our demo account, and I expect that this presentation should help you better understand what you can find there and how can you reuse the things from the demo account once you wish to create the burndown charts from the scratch. But let me take a step back and give a look on the burndown chart from a bit wider perspective. Progress tracking is always the key thing when it goes to the project management. And during the times before the burndown charts become widely adapted, there were also a lot of different approaches for the progress tracking, simply because the tracking is so important thing. And from almost every episode in my previous experience, I remember that everyone was pushed by different levels of management to know what is the status of the tasks, and that included a sort of estimation, task status tracking, and other quite complicated and time-consuming activities. The reporting, to my memory, was quite complicated and full of stress. And here I believe that popularity of the burndown charts is in their simplicity and being so informative, so that as to what our progress over time is. And Jira as a universal tool for team collaboration stores a lot of data to present the task progress with the help of burndown charts. And that means the good news is this eazyBI can help you for building your burndown charts from Jira data. Well, knowing that burndown is a complex topic, I try to imagine what might be the simplest burndown chart you can create with eazyBI. And luckily, one customer request led me to one simple idea, and the customer asked me for a small adjustment in his chart when what he called a burndown chart, and my first thinking was that this is not a burndown, but after a while I had to agree it is, and here it goes. Even the simplest burndown chart will need at least two things. First, it is timeline, so I added the time dimension in the eazyBI to the report rows with the monthly hierarchy level. And second, it needs a measure showing some burndown of values over time. And there is a standard measure of open issues which is suitable for that. Open issues in development type of activities should be sooner or later declining number, which means it fits for the burndown purposes. And for the bonus, I added a linear trend for this measure, well, because it is so easy to do with eazyBI and interesting to see on the chart. And we can just click on the column and build a linear trend on the open issues. So I applied page filtering to focus on a single project and selected the stories to make me safe that this chart would not include some never-ending tail of the bug tracking. I selected the bar chart with proper settings of visualization and got the report like this. And it looks like a minimalistic but quite informative chart. Yeah, well, it might look too simple, and here I have to confess that I did a bit more than I explained earlier to make the chart to look so clean. As you can see, the report actually has a bit uneven endings with a linear trend. And at some point, my open stories started to grow again. So this was probably due to some extra scope in the project, and I applied time filtering to have a better focus in my report with such a filtering. The burndown chart usually needs to define some limit over the time, and there are several good reasons to apply those limits. In this case, I used a very simple time filtering. We will touch some other approaches later, which are more advanced for the time filtering. Before going in more detail, I wanted to mention that sometimes people use alternative concepts of the burndown and burnup chart, but there seem to be no too significant differences regarding the contents of those reports, except the direction of lines. After a bit of web searching, we can find that when the lines go down, it is a burn down, and it is the burn up when lines go up in the chart expectedly. But note, however, that the essential contents of the report might remain the same, and it is a progress of the project scope. And so in my further presentation, I will sometimes use those concepts as synonyms. But when we try to separate the burndowns and burnups, the most typical burndown measure in eazyBI where the lines should go down is the remaining scope. For instance, the remaining story points measure. That might not be true, that remaining goes down, unfortunately. At some periods it can be growing. The full scope might not be always known before we start our tasks. Estimates might change, usually grow. But the idea is that the burndown line shows the remaining scope, which is declining as we resolve our tasks. And similarly, the burn up will show the completed scope, or in this case, the cumulative amount of resolved story points, which is shown by this green line. This example shows that in some cases we might wish to show both the burn up and burn down lines on the same chart, because it might give different aspects of our progress. But now let's dig into some detail of what you should consider before trying to build your burndown or defining the requirements for the burndown charts. I will show several examples of burndown charts, which are different kinds of reports on sprints and on versions. There are always at least two good alternatives in between you need to choose when starting the burndown chart. You can have the burndown chart either by the issue counts or by some estimated size of tasks. And story points is the most popular estimation approach in the agile world. And you can see in those two examples showing the same sprint burndown by issue counts on the left and by the story points on the right. The lines usually take a similar shape, but having estimates is what adds a bit more precision to the burndown. As we can see here, the burndown by issue count on the left shows a bit optimistic picture than on the right side by story points. Well, because as usually, less complex tasks are completed already, but more complex still pending. But the advantage of the issue count is that you don't need to have an estimation practices. You can build your burndown just on issue counts. Well, in the case of eazyBI, there is no significant difference because eazyBI offers standard measures both for issue counts and for story point tracking in the burndowns. The burndown charts may have a bit different goals depending on whether you try to report on fixed scope or fixed time activities. The fixed scope is the approach where all the items from the scope must be completed before we can say our project is done. Scope can flow in gradually, as the blue line shows here on the left, but the project is completed when all the items added will be ready, so the green bars will reach the blue line. It is a different situation with the approaches of doing work in sprints, which are the time-limited frames, and usually does not strictly say how much of the initial scope will be completed. The sprint scope usually is assigned by the expected velocity of the team, and it can also change over time, but the time limit of the sprint always remains strict. For both cases, burndown charts can help, though in a slightly different way. Here, for the fixed scope cases, burndown chart helps with the schedule performance, or when would we expect to complete our tasks. And the red line here shows the area for the which could be a possible gap. And for the fixed time activities, burndown will show the scope performance, or what part of scope will be completed at the end of the sprint. Here, the red vertical line shows the gap, and burndown charts are excellent tools for tracking those gaps. At the beginning, I showed my simple burndown where I needed to add time filtering for making the report cleaner and more focused on what was my reporting goal. And that is often the case with the burndown reports. Well, sometimes you can do that with the hide empty option in the report, but that most likely will not work when you add some measure for the calculation of trends or predictions in the burndown chart. And the recommended technique is for this purpose is to implement a custom measure for the filtering the time. Those measures essentially are built on the start and end dates, for instance, on version start or sprint start and end dates. But there can be also some more advanced logic implemented in those filtering measures. And here you can check our demo account. You can search and filter measures by time in, and you will find several good versions of how to create time filtering measures for the cases of sprint, version, project, or even epic. So please check that in our demo account. But the most of the details are hidden behind the measures you are using in your reports of eazyBI. And there is quite a complex logic behind most of them when building the burndown charts. But luckily, many measures are available already for the many cases, and you can add them and use as is. But let me explain further details about some of them, and I will split it in two groups for a more systematic view. First is the burndown measures, or those measures showing the actuals of the progress. Well, depending on if you are building the burndown or burnup chart, you will need a basic measure for showing the progress. It can be burnup or burndown. It can be based on the number of issues, on story points, or on estimates. In this example, I used the story points remaining and story points, cumulative story points resolved measures, both available as eazyBI standard measures. Well, you may wish to have both of them on the chart, since these standard measures can show some different aspects of the progress. Well, in any case, those measures are the key thing in your burndown chart when you start building it from the scratch. Some burndown charts might need to show how far the progress line is from the scope. And there are different approaches for calculation of the total scope. Even if you do not plan to show the total scope in your chart, it is important to keep in mind how the scope is defined for your activity. because other burndown measures can be based on that and on the total scope, and they usually are. A simpler approach is to consider the total scope as a static and fix the size of the scope by the total value at some point. And this picture shows an example with the committed story points of the sprint. Yeah, it's completely flat line. There can be other good alternatives, for instance, to fix the scope at some specific date for the version, or define the scope on what is known as of today. In reality, however, we know that scope might be extremely volatile. Even the sprints may add or remove stories, change the estimates during the period of sprint execution, which is quite limited. The changing scope calculation can be implemented with the historical measures in eazyBI. In this example, I used the story points history measures for tracking the changing scope of the sprint. The story points history measure is time aware, and it shows the total scope of the sprint over time. In this example, the blue line represents the change in total scope, well, which might have happened due to changing estimates, adding or removing stories during the sprint to adjust this scope to the team capacity or because of some other reasons. There is one more typical thing to include in burndown charts, or it is so-called optimal burndown. For the sprints, we usually call it the guideline. It is the line or measure showing how the total scope should be completed evenly to reach the planned end date. In this case, we use the committed story points of the sprint as a total scope, and the sprint end date as the target date for the completion. And this calculation uses the MDX functions of processing dates and durations. In this particular case, you can see the steps in the line, which is because the durations behind the measure are calculated in the work days. And it shows that no progress is needed during the non-working days, which is fine. There can be variations of this guideline. For instance, in version reports, it can take the release date as the target date. It can show the guideline to complete not the full scope, but the remaining scope by the release date if you are in the middle of our project. It can also be based on story points, issue counts, or on our estimates if needed. One more trick to make your burndown chart more informative is to add the effort spent. You should be careful not to overload the report with too much information, but the effort is meaningful measure for tracking the performance of the budget. Well, it is good to know how much of the scope is completed, but did it take a reasonable effort? And in this example, I created a new measure for calculation of the cumulative amount of the hours spent in the sprint. Now we can put this measure in the report to show how much hours are spent and to see if that is in line with the completed story points in the sprint. A bit specific part is the forecast measures. Those measures are usually more applicable for the fixed scope burndown or burnup reports. This example of burndown chart or burnup chart is created on the estimated hours and calculates the planned completion date of the version. You can see the vertical red lines showing some milestones, including the predicted completion date at the end here. The MDX language used in eazyBI is very rich in functions to process dates and durations. Yeah, and those functions are extremely useful for calculation of future dates. For instance, of how the fixed scope projects are expected to fulfill the schedule. There can be different approaches of how to predict the completion, either by the previous velocity of the version or maybe by some rolling average over last periods. All those different cases can be covered by adjusting the calculations of the predicted completion line. So this predicted completion line is created using the this end date and total project scope. One more thing I wanted to note in this report is that the time inversion measure, which I again use for the time filtering in this example, can cover full period from the version start date till the predicted end date. Note also that forecasting reports might need to generate manually new time members for the future periods that might not be present in the data cube by just data import from Jira. And there is one more technique often used in the burndown or burnup charts. I showed it already on the beginning. When looking for the predictions and forecasts, it is a simpler solution for looking in the future for the trends and expected outcomes of the progress. Linear regression is quite a complex thing from statistics, but you can use it by a couple of clicks in eazyBI. You need to select the measure from which to calculate the linear trend, and eazyBI will do the linear trend for you. So in my previous version report, you can have one more dashed line. You can see it on the screen now. And it gives a bit different perspective on how my project will be completed when comparing to the calculation of the predicted completion date. In this case, the linear trend forecasts much more pessimistic completion of the version release, obviously, because the latest period of my release has no progress at all. Yeah, but well, definitely the applicability of any forecasting method should be always carefully evaluated before use. So let me remind you again that there is a demo account where you can borrow good ideas of how to create your burndown charts. There are 3 dashboards where you could find useful examples of burndown charts. First is the sprint overview, where you can find sprint burndowns, and then excellent report of ethic burndown by sprints. There is the version overview dashboard, where among others you will find the version report created in eazyBI, and one more dashboard completely devoted to the forecast and management with a couple of burndown reports and many other things for forecasting. Well, thank you for your attention. You are welcome to submit your questions in our community or in our chat rooms now, or contact us through the support email once you have questions about burndown charts or, well, any other questions. Thank you.